Hey folks, I want to let you know about a sponsor for today's episode, RevenueCat. RevenueCat has been a fantastic sponsor, and they're the perfect sponsor for our audience, developers like yourself. It makes it easy for app developers to build, analyze, and grow in-app purchases and subscriptions, whether you're doing iOS, Android, or the web. There's no server code required. With a few lines of codes, you can get in-app purchase infrastructure, analytics, and integrations without managing servers. No need to check certificates or receipts. RevenueCat does that all for you. Are you integrating with several different web services? RevenueCat can do that. Do you need really important reports? RevenueCat has an awesome dashboard worth checking out. If you didn't watch our episode with Andrew Bodeo about what RevenueCat does and how complex in-app purchases can be, then you should definitely take some time to watch that episode. He goes over how challenging in-app purchases can be and why RevenueCat is such a great help for developers out there. If you're indie or your enterprise, definitely take a look at RevenueCat and what kind of services they have to offer. It's very reasonably priced, no matter who you are. So whether you need an in-depth dashboard, customer lists, filters, or segments for your different customer bases, are you doing anything with the Amazon App Store or other services? Are you providing on other platforms? Take some time, go to the link in the show notes below, and give RevenueCat a try. It's going to be really easy for you to integrate and get started. And thank you, RevenueCat, for sponsoring today's episode. Welcome to another episode of Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dion. Today, I am joined by David Barnard. David, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to chat.
Yeah. Been following you on Twitter, and obviously a big fan of RevenueCat, so it's great to have you on. Before we get started, I'll let you talk about yourself and introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm David Barnard, a longtime indie developer. So I've run my company Contract. Well, and actually founded the company as AppCubby and then had to switch names, which is an interesting story we might talk about. But been running that for 14 years now. So I kicked off my company right after Steve Jobs left the stage in 2008, introducing the iPhone SDK. I've shipped, like 20 something apps, seen, I think it's like 6 million downloads at this point, and all without ever hiring an employee, working with contractors and whatnot. And then the last 2 years, I actually joined RevenueCat as developer advocate. And so RevenueCat's a platform to help with payments for subscription apps. So it's subscription app infrastructure, charts and SDKs for making in-app purchases easy. So I run the SubClub podcast as part of that, and actually have a private community. We're going to be opening up a wait list to the SubClub community. So stay pretty busy these days. Got a big update to my weather app coming hopefully in March. Busy as can be.
Yeah, I know how that is. Yeah, I'll provide links in the show notes. Obviously, probably listeners of the podcast know about RevenueCat. They're a sponsor of this show, and they're a great service. So really happy to have another person from RevenueCat on. We had Andy on, Andy Bodeo. So
he's great.
Yeah. So, but we're going to have you
sponsored the show. It's kind of fun. We're at a point as a company where there's just so many different people doing so many different things. It's like I get to learn about them for the first time live.
So you've been doing indie development, you said now like almost 15 years, I guess. Mm-hmm. How did you get started? Like, what did you do before that, I guess?
So I was a recording engineer, actually. Ever since I was, like 10 or 12, I was into music and into like the tech side of music, and got a little 4-track recorder. I mean, I'm super old, so this was like the late 80s, early 90s. Got a little 4-track tape recorder, Tascam.
Wow. Okay.
Anybody who's like been into audio back in the 90s will remember these like little 4-track cassette Tascam recorders. It was like the early kind of like home studio kind of stuff. Anyways, so I actually studied that at university, and then was a freelance recording engineer for 4 or 5 years. And like there's still albums I worked on in the App Store, in the iTunes store. and streaming on Spotify and all that kind of stuff. But I got married and didn't see my wife for like a year. I was working, like noon to 2 a.m., typical like musician kind of studio life. And, as we started thinking about having a family, it just became more and more clear that both financially, as an independent recording engineer, I wasn't making any money. So both the like finances and the time just, obviously weren't very compatible with growing a family. And so I'd always been super into Apple and tech and got an iPhone early on, and it just seemed like such an incredible opportunity once the rumors of the iPhone SDK started circling after the iPhone launched. And that I think it was a fall of 2007 that Steve Jobs actually confirmed in some kind of letter, saying we will have an SDK. And then of course in March, he introduced the SDK. So I founded my company immediately because I kind of, saw the writing on the wall, thought it'd be a great opportunity. I'd never coded. I'd tinkered a lot, like I'd learned HTML, JavaScript, kind of simple stuff. I had done a big project in FileMaker for my dad's company where I had to do some kind of high level scripting and coding kind of stuff. So I thought, how hard will it be? I'll learn to code apps and like build an app. And I actually tried to get my buddy, shout out to my friend, Sean McMains. He's an incredible coder. He now works for Deximity. And I tried to get him to partner with me. He and I joke now. I mean, we're still friends and been friends for, like 25 years now. How life may have been different had he partnered with me, but he had 4 kids and just busy at the time and didn't jump in. So I was like, how hard can this be? So I got the Hill of Gas coding book and I started going through it while simultaneously like talking to lawyers about getting the LLC spun up and trying to figure out design resources and all this. And so about 3 weeks in, I was like, oh, okay. So, being a legit programmer, especially, this was back when like the Hill Gas book was for Mac programming. And the iPhone SDK was totally new, and there was an NDA in place. So there was like no resources. You couldn't even like post a blog post about like, here's how you solve these one obscure bug, or here's how you like provision to release a beta. It was like everything was like you had to, talk to random people on Twitter and like have private conversations. Like there was nothing. So I got a couple of weeks in and I was like, yeah, I can't like learn all the new stuff and like become a programmer simultaneously and ship a product. And so I actually hired a contract programmer, Jonathan Johnson. He's actually still in the industry and kind of never looked back from there. And so a lot of people don't realize that I actually don't code. So it's been a combination of partners and hired contractors over the years to build the apps. And so I do find the indie developer label a little awkward sometimes because people just assume that I do actually code, but I don't.
Do you think that's helped you not being a coder, but building apps? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I've talked about this a few times and thought a lot about it over the years. Absolutely. And I wouldn't be, I don't think I'd have landed where I did with RevenueCat, which I just love the company, love the product we're building, love the team. Like it's just been like a fantastic place to work. I never thought I'd enjoy a job. Never thought I'd get a job. And so what ended up happening is that because I didn't ever learn to code, and again, it's like part of me thinks, 100 different times I could have like taken a few months and done a boot camp or something. But because I never did that, I kind of had more free time than I would have had I coded. And so that's where I spent a ton of time studying the app market, like browsing the top lists, like writing blog posts, thinking about marketing. And like, it just kind of forced me to think about and do all those other things in the time that I would otherwise be coding, where I think a lot of indie developers who are so focused on just fixing bugs and writing the app themselves, it's really hard to kind of switch hats and then go, okay, well, why am I building this? What,
Right.
what, value does a product deliver? What's going on in the app store economy that I can leverage? Like what features, like you have to really kind of take off that, programmer hat and put on all these different hats to really build a business. And that's where I do think it worked out really well over the years for me to be so focused on all those other things without being head down in Xcode 12 hours a day, like, some of my partners have been over the years.
Yeah, I mean, that's we've talked about this with a lot of our other indie guests, but also like I feel like my vice is like I love the craft of coding, and like I'll just be coding away without realizing like, okay, what's the end here? Like, is there actually people who are going to use this? Asking those like marketing questions that developers like don't want to ask because they just want to spend 12 hours in Xcode. And like, it's almost like a handicap in a way, like of just like wanting to be a coder and knowing so much about that. And then to have to shove one more thing into your brain, like marketing, it can be a real challenge. So yeah, yep. I can imagine might actually be helpful in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And then, even things like, press, when I'm not head down in coding all the time, I've written so much over the years and talked to enough people in the press where, they'll DM me and say, hey, can you give us a comment on this? And I'm not head down in some like deep project. And so I can just, jump in and give them a response. And that's, built a lot of relationships over the years. And gotten, and then help get attention for my apps and get, my name out there and stuff like that. And so, there's so many ways I think that it just works. And I mean, this is another thing that's been fun about joining RevenueCat is realizing that, as teams start to grow, you can hire more and more specialized folks. And so what I've seen as like we hired Jens is our head of product. We hired him almost a year ago. And like I've been a product manager for 14 years now, right? I like run my own apps and like I've got backlogs and all this stuff. But like I'm a terrible product manager. And like Jens is a real professional product manager and does an incredible job. Like I've learned so much just watching how he operates inside RevenueCat. And so what's interesting to kind of spin it all the way back is that as an indie developer wearing all these different hats, you do have to recognize that you're not going to be an incredible product manager if like 2 hours of your time is spent on product management. And then you're not going to be an incredible marketer if like you tack it on to the end of like, okay, I've spent 6 months building this app. Now, like it's a week before launch and I'm going to be a marketer. It's like, no, like you can get reasonably good at different aspects of it. And these are all things you should strive to get better at. But it's like recognize your strengths and weaknesses and then hit those 80-20 things. Like, don't think you're going to be this amazing marketer in like 5 hours the week before you're launching. Like, think about it ahead and strategically like figure out the kind of highest leverage things you can do. And then what was interesting for me then is that because I wasn't programming and because I wasn't designing either, although I've tinkered enough in Sketch and Photoshop over the years like there's a lot of my artwork that ships in my apps just by default, where I'll kind of modify the designer's artwork to just, get things done. But because I wasn't actively doing those two things, I could actually get a little bit better and be a little more focused on the business side, the marketing side, and other things. And so while I don't consider myself a great product manager or a great marketer or a great PR person or a great whatever, I at least am better at some of those things because I just had more, at bats, more reps, more focus on it over the years. And so even from that standpoint, kind of having me plus a designer plus a developer is kind of how it's almost always gone with my apps. Is that team of three can be really strong, and even though none of us are necessarily focusing on any one app full time as a team of three, but each of us can specialize. And so, yeah, right. I think it really has been a benefit over the years.
So let's talk about that a little bit. What was your process of going from an idea to like actually starting to build and put the app in the App Store? Like, how did you filter those ideas out?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've done a pretty terrible job at over the years in some ways. So, and I'll give you a couple of examples that I learned a ton from. One idea I had really early on was to build a better Wikipedia app. And I thought, well, all these Wikipedia apps, there's a market for them, people use them, but all these Wikipedia apps are just web views. Like there's so much better experience that we could bring to the market with a natively rendered wiki text Wikipedia app. And that seemed like a great idea. There were several successful Wikipedia readers at the time. I mean, this is like 2010. It was actually, the plan was to launch it with the iPad in whatever that was, 2010, I think.
Okay.
And so it seemed like a great idea. It seemed like there was a market, but the scope of it was just way beyond what I even understood at the time. And so we spun our wheels, and I ended up losing $50,000 on that project between designers, multiple programmers, and other stuff that I hired out building up to it. And we just got to this point with the product where I realized like I could put another 50,000 in and finish it. One, I didn't have $50,000 sitting around. Like I was like, 5,000 this month because Gas Cubby did really well, and 2,000 next month because Trip Cubby did really well. And so I was kind of reinvesting all the profits. And so I realized, I could take every penny of profit for the next year and keep dumping it in and get to a final product. But then what I realized is that the likelihood of getting a return on finishing that project just wasn't strong. This was back when, it was one-time upfront purchase for an app, and you were just relying on the market growing. And so it's like,
and you're competing against Wikipedia themselves. Like,
actually at the time, I don't remember if Wikipedia had their own app.
Okay.
And maybe in the intervening time, that was another factor that came about.
Yeah.
So that was one we're just recognizing as an indie developer, with limited resources. I mean, 50,000 sounds like a big budget, but it was limited. And so we just bit off way more than we could chew. And so on the flip side, two of my more kind of successful experiments was this Kaleidoscope app. And it was just a total like kind of, it was, I mean, literally a 99-cent app. Like we just shipped it for 99 cents, and it didn't do especially well, but it was a very low investment. It was like, let's see if this can work, like see if anybody likes it. And so that app flopped. It was called KaleidoVid. And it was like this video kaleidoscope thing, which was actually, it's a really fun little app. But we then took that code base, and when Apple announced the iPhone 4 with the front-facing camera, it's like, what interesting things could we do with the front-facing camera? We'd already worked on a photo app. We had all this code around photo apps. And so I came up with the mirror idea of like, just, let's just see if this front-facing camera, like you can check your teeth, you can do makeup, like, maybe this thing will be interesting. And that's actually been one of my most successful apps, was just leveraging Apple's new frameworks in a unique way, or new. And this time it was new hardware capabilities. It's been a long time since they've introduced new hardware capabilities. I think maybe NFC reading was the last one off the top of my head. But it was just like, let's leverage this and let's do it in a way that we're reusing a bunch of code. So, I think Leighton Duncan was actually my partner on that one. And I think it took him just like 10, 12 hours to repurpose the code for us to launch this app. And so that's where I think really thinking through like, what's the real scope of this? What's the market opportunity? So if there is a big market opportunity, you can potentially, put more time and resources into it. But as an indie, sometimes you do just need to look for that low-hanging fruit and say, okay, this is a fun idea. I don't know if it'll get traction, but let's put a month into it and cap it at that, and like go for it and see if there's like some sign of product market fit.
Right.
But on the flip side, I mean, there are great ways, and I've never been good at this, but there are great ways to try and better understand the potential for a market ahead of time. So like Zach Shaked, he did this thing where he was trying to build a $100,000 grossing app within 6 months. And so he started it the way I think a lot more people should start it. And this is like putting the business hat on and really thinking through, like, how can I show some sign of product market fit before I even start coding? And then that gives you kind of better kind of proof of concept to then invest more time and money into it and build a deeper product that you kind of know, have a better idea is going to work. So what he did was he posted on Reddit, hey, anybody like the idea? I forget exactly how I worded it or whatever, but it was a zero cooking meal prep app. And so he just, he was a bachelor and just tired of like having to make food all the time. And so she came up with this idea, like you can just buy like canned food, frozen food, dump it all in a thing, and then you can just throw that in the microwave. And so before he'd even written a line of code, he had a huge Reddit thread of people like super excited. Somebody, a life hacker, actually picked it up and it got news. And so like, and actually he didn't build that. So somebody should probably still go out there and build it. And so there are ways to kind of prove out a concept and like, just, and people are so precious about ideas. Like there are some ideas where like, if somebody else could beat you to the punch, if it is something like super unique or different or whatever, but look at what happened with him. It's like he came up with a great idea. He posted it to Reddit. It got picked up in Lifehacker, and still nobody has built that app. So I think like sometimes we're maybe a little too precious about these ideas, and you think, oh, we need to spend 6 months in the dark building this thing, but you're building this thing you don't even know people actually want. And then I've already gone probably way longer than.
Well, I was just gonna say, like being first isn't even worth it. Like
sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
Right? Yeah, because sometimes being first, that might be a good indication of whether something's going to be successful or not. And like also like sometimes being first, you don't quite hit that market fit, right? Like nobody knows. I mean, whatever. Yeah. Look at Google Glass. Look at mobile phones. Like all that stuff. Yeah. Like being first isn't always the best.
The one last thing I want to hit on, because I think a lot of indie developers make this mistake over and over and over again. I almost made it 2020. I was looking at the wallpaper app category. And I was like, man, look at these wallpaper apps making $1 million a month. And like there's multiple wallpaper apps just doing crazy numbers. So I was like, I got to build a wallpaper app. Like I can build a better app. Like these apps are terrible. It was just like classic, like, if I build if you build it, they will come, build a better mousetrap kind of thinking. And this is where I think the disconnect happens, is that a lot of folks who kind of do that surface level market research, it's like, oh, well, there's a market to be had in the wallpaper space. And they leave it at that. Like, oh, there's all these apps. I'm just going to build the best wallpaper app ever, and then that's going to be great. What I did at that point was then to go download all these wallpaper apps and start to understand, why are they making $1 million a month? And then what I learned really quickly and, tweeted about at the time and have tweeted about multiple times over the years, is that they were super scammy. They had like dark patterns. They had like $10, $20 a week subscriptions. They were just super scammy apps. And so, and then like the longer you've been in the industry, you start to like see patterns and see some of this underbelly. Costa has been calling out a lot of it on Twitter, and I have over the years too. I actually even had a blog post in like 2017, 2018. It was called like how to game the App Store. And so what you start to see is these patterns with these wallpaper apps is they were probably buying reviews. And so that's why they had an almost 5-star review, even though they were super scammy, is because they were actually buying reviews. And then they were probably dumping a ton of money into ads. Like at the time it's getting harder to do this because it's harder to track. But at the time, before app tracking transparency, you could spin up Facebook ads and have really granular detail on your return on ad spend. And so these apps making $1 million a month, they may have been spending, $700, $800, $900,000 a month to get that $1 million, and may have had a team of 20 in Eastern Europe or the Philippines or China or somewhere, where they were putting a ton of time and money into it that you can't see on the surface. And so when you're doing market research, don't just look at the surface and think, oh, this app's making, $1 million a month. I can build a better mousetrap and capture some of that revenue. Really try and understand and this is what's so hard, is like, oftentimes you just don't know what they're doing behind the scenes to make those numbers that you see on Sensor Tower. And then keep in mind, Sensor Tower, App Annie, and all these people, it's like they're not necessarily accurate anyway. So it may not even be $1 million a month. It may be 700 a month. And then you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, both, dark patterns you can see, dark patterns you can't see, cheating on the App Store, massive marketing budgets. Like, there's so much behind the scenes that is hard to understand. And so when you're doing this market research, just don't fall prey to the, hey, this app's making money, I can build something better.
What are some like good smells to know whether a certain market is just filled with scammy apps and it's like not worth your time?
Well, what I've seen lately is that most of the big keywords end up kind of getting filled up with those sorts of apps. I mean, not always like super scammy. And one of the things I've been super impressed with, to be honest, is some of the apps that were really scammy early on to gain traction have actually turned into really great apps. Like the weather category is a great example of this. Like there were some really scammy weather apps, and there still are. But some of those scammy weather apps have actually turned into legitimately great apps. But the pattern I've seen is that one of the things that helps a lot is getting traction in keywords so that you can get free organic downloads. And so part of the strategy is like, pick a keyword that tons of people are searching for, weather, wallpapers, widgets. Like, there's a bunch of widget apps out there now that have both cloned and then even innovated from what David Smith did with WidgetSmith. So kind of pick a category that like has that kind of organic traction, because once you start dumping paid dollars on, if you can climb in the search results and start getting free, it's like this virtuous loop. And so if you're buying reviews, if you're spending a ton of money on ads, if you have a halfway decent product, you can often get pretty high up in the search results for these really popular keywords and actually kind of amplify the money you're spending on ads. So those kind of like high value keywords where there's a lot of organic traffic tend to be a lot more crowded than the kind of more niche keywords. But really, I mean, you just have to like, spend the time and go download the apps and understand, like, look at the top 20 apps in the category.
Do a competitive analysis.
Do a competitive analysis, but then do that within the back of your mind that as much as you think you might know why they're succeeding or how they're succeeding, you probably don't know why or how they're actually succeeding. Yeah. And one of the most frustrating things about all this is like, I've told all this to Apple multiple times to help them better like spot some of the more scammy apps and the frustrating thing about this is that you do often end up with some category leaders that are just terrible experiences for users, where there's just, ads constantly, dark patterns and like all this stuff. And so it's like Apple as a curator of the App Store should do a better job of incentivizing developers to build really great products, and that building a great product will help accelerate things. And it's not a like, if you build a great product, like Apple should just magically make you the top result. Like that's like not at all what I'm saying.
Right.
But what happens is you do end up with a lot of scammier apps at the top of these popular keywords. Whereas like ideally the incentives around the App Store, if they better policed the fake reviews, if they better policed a lot of aspects of the kind of dark patterns and stuff like that, is that you would hopefully end up with better products at the top. And that's where it's like you can go to almost any category, download the top 10 and just be like, wow, these are actually pretty crappy apps. Like, why are they making so much money?
Right.
It's like, well, they're doing the stuff that you're not going to do, or you're going to risk getting yourself kicked out of the App Store for doing, but they're not getting kicked out of the App Store for doing it.
Usually, I mean, at this point, I kind of like look at a blog post for people to recommend an app than rather like search on the App Store, just because I'm so afraid of like what could be out there. Do you think like, I don't, well, we can get into it, but like, what do you think is the future of Apple's relationship with indies? Because it like, I don't know, like the app review thing, it's like, it's kind of a cluster on both sides, right? Because it's like, you have a great app, you follow all the rules, you get denied. And then you see, like you said, all these scammy apps that are just like cheating the system. Like I said, I'm not confident about going on the App Store and looking for stuff on there. I'd rather have somebody personally recommend it, because I've been, naive, and I'd go on, I'm like, okay, let's just search for something. And then you pull it down, and it's like 500 ads on it. And like you could tell this is just some crappy like app built in a day. I don't know. Like that to me is like, for all the controversies there are with the App Store, that to me is the biggest one, is like this excuse, like the App Store is a great gatekeeper of good apps and good quality. But the reality is you just kind of, a lot of indies don't have great experiences dealing with App Store review. And then like we see all this garbage in the App Store at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, this is a tough one. And I mean, I see both sides just as long as I've been in the industry and, talking to people at Apple and talking to so many indies, and then now at RevenueCat talking to companies of all sizes, I think there's kind of a forest for the trees issue on both sides. Is that as indies, it's like sometimes we feel like our apps are the best and the most well-crafted and should get more attention. And at the end of the day, often that's not as true as we'd like to believe. And so, and then from Apple's side, I mean, I do think that there is a little bit of, there's a lot of tension in, anytime Apple kind of cracks down, then you end up with more rejections, you end up with more hassle with review. And so it's like we as a community are simultaneously saying, Apple, you should crack down more, but then getting pissed off when our apps get rejected. So it's like, what do you want? Do you want the App Store to be more tightly curated? And if that's the case, like we are going to have to deal with more app review rejections and other issues that are just a natural result of that. Because if they're going to catch the other, like it's just a hard process to get right. But my frustration with Apple is that there are a lot of things that they're just not doing. Like and Gruber's talked about this, Costas talked about this, like a lot of people in the community have talked about, if they just started from the top 1,000 apps and had like their top reviewers go and watch for apps that are climbing the ranks and go through and look for these dark patterns and look for these fake reviews. Because once you see them, they're really easy to spot. And it's like they just haven't built out the systems for that. And then, as much money as Apple has made on the App Store, it feels like they continually underinvest in some of these areas. Like I know, app review, it was revealed in the Epic lawsuit that it's only like 300 people. And to be honest, like I thought it was like 2,000 people.
Yeah.
And then it was revealed in the lawsuit too that they're hiring like really junior, low level, like they're hiring people out of Apple retail and stuff. And it's like, this should be a more sophisticated role with more sophisticated people with higher pay, with more, knowledge. And so that's the disconnect for me is like, okay, Apple, like, you're making a ton of money. This is super valuable. I'm still pretty bought into the whole like walled garden thing.
Yeah, me too.
I just want them to like do a better job at it.
Yeah, I don't want side loading. I don't want alternate app stores. It's just going to be a mess to deal with. And like, On top of it all, it's built on iTunes, right?
Yeah.
Like it's put together with duct tape and it's for selling albums in 2003, but now for iPods, and now it's like being used for this major infrastructure where millions and billions of dollars are going through.
Yeah. And so as far as like Apple's relationship with indies specifically, in a lot of ways, I feel like they do a great job at a lot of the stuff they do. And I think we don't maybe even give them enough credit. I'm playing both sides here because I'm simultaneously incredibly frustrated with Apple in so many ways. So like not to discount all those frustrations and ways that as a multi-trillion-dollar company, I think they should be doing better by indie developers. On the flip side, they really do a lot. And if you look at like featured lists, if you look at, they really try and seek out the well-crafted apps to feature. Now here's like back to like the frustration. Being featured matters less and less these days because fewer people are browsing the App Store. And so it's like they think they're doing indies this big favor by featuring you. And it helps, certainly, but it's just like less and less of a favor these days. Like back, 5-8 years ago, you got featured and it could mean, tens of thousands of dollars in a single week and like make a huge difference to like sustainability and everything. And these days it's just not driving that kind of volume. And so
I want to ask one question about that, because you mentioned this earlier about the front facing camera. How much do you think it helps nowadays to get a day one app out that uses some feature either new to the OS or new to the device?
So like, and that's actually a great example. I mean, if you look at the last, 5 major launches, of new features. So, with each major iOS release that has, big new features, Apple puts a lot behind these well-crafted indie apps. Widgetsmith got featured, but like Widgetsmith got featured for being day one, but it really blew up because of TikTok.
Right. TikTok's been a big helper in that space recently.
Yeah, and for them specifically, but it's really hard to like make it go viral. It's that's a very hit or miss kind of thing. So Apple does put weight behind it. And they do feature a lot of like up and coming and indie and stuff like that. But it's a very similar thing in that it's only going to go so far. And that's the Widgetsmith example, was like, had Widgetsmith not gone viral on TikTok, it probably would have gotten, tens of thousands of downloads from having been featured. And so it's like that's not enough marketing to really get something off the ground and like, get it to the point of being a full-time job. Yes, you'll get, thousands, tens of thousands of downloads by getting featured. And so the way I think about that kind of day one app thing is that it doesn't hurt, certainly, unless you're doing it at the expense of other features that would actually have better product market fit. So like if you're throwing some crazy, like Carrot's a great example. I've known Brian for years. He did this AR thing because Apple was really pushing AR. Well, it got featured a ton or whatever, but it was like very, very, very gimmicky feature. It didn't really enhance the experience of the app. It's not like anybody's going to use that feature consistently. It's not delivering additional value to your subscribers other than this like, quick fun thing. So, did Carrot Weather get benefit for being day one with AR? Yeah. But if you look at the history of Carrot, like why is Carrot such an incredible weather app? It's because dude busts it and builds incredible features. Like, I mean, I'm still in the weather category and working on my weather 3.0 update. And it just watching his pace of feature development, like he's winning because he's for 7 years now, just consistently continue building a better and better and better and better app. And so if you're building these day one features at the sacrifice of building a better app, then you're probably better off just focusing on building a better app, especially as an indie where your time and resources are limited. If it's something that truly enhances your app, like building a really fantastic widget that is actually like a fantastic experience, and you get featured for something that's actually a fantastic experience, that's when like it can even be that much more helpful, versus like just throwing these like kind of gimmicky features in there in hopes that Apple's going to feature you.
And widgets are a great example of that as opposed to AR. It's like
Yeah.
AR but like widgets, they like totally make sense for a lot of people because you want to see that data on the home screen for most apps.
Right.
So I wanted to ask, go back to the question, the hard question. What do you think like the future is going to be? Like, do you think like how, obviously I think one of the big monkey wrenches obviously is the pandemic, because now we don't have WWDC in person. So now we've done these like dev tech talk things. Like lately, like in the last, is it like in the next week or so, they're doing a lot of marketing stuff with like product pages and things like that. So they definitely like try to help indies. Do you think there's like do you think there's going to be any change in that relationship? Because we're far away from like the days of 2007, 2008, where you could just put anything out and make money.
Yeah. I mean, I think the best thing Apple can do for indies is to just keep building a better app store. It's like better aligning incentives, better policing the scammy stuff, because then it gives you a better chance to shine. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think there is like I was saying earlier, I mean, I think there's a tension in that, Apple runs this multi-billion-dollar marketplace now. And in any kind of marketplace, I mean, think about Amazon sellers,
Oh yeah. I watched a whole video about Amazon reviews, fake reviews. It's miserable.
Yeah. And then, and the internet more broadly, it's like, you can build something great and it, get zero attention. So should Apple better align incentives in the App Store? Absolutely. Can they, magically wave a wand and like help indies be more successful? I don't think that should be the goal specifically. I think that if Apple really, and this is where it's so frustrating. I've talked about this over and over again on the SubClub podcast and in tweets and everything else. If you dropped Apple, if you erased Apple execs' memory and dropped them inside Apple today and said, what should the App Store look like for 2022 and beyond? It's clear that even with AR glasses and whatever else is coming down the pipe, that apps are going to continue to be incredibly important for decades to come. I mean, just like, you would have thought in the 90s that, how long is this like, web page thing going to really be going? And I mean, 30 years later, it's still going. Desktop apps, similar. It's like, desktop apps are still incredibly important. So the mobile app stores, even if they're augmented by augmented reality and otherwise, are going to be incredibly important for decades to come. And so I wish, Apple could take a step back and think, what should the App Store look like for the next decade? And I think if they did those kind of exercises inside of Apple and really built for that next decade, that's what would actually be the best for indie developers versus like, and better aligning those incentives, better policing, better curation, maintaining the trust of customers that they will actually go browse and search more instead of relying on friends and searching the web. It's like if they can just keep building a better app store, that's going to create more opportunities for indies. And then the indie developer community needs to, think more about marketing, about business, about positioning, about PR, about all these things that historically we haven't necessarily been very good at as a community. And instead of only focusing on the product and thinking, well, if we build a better mousetrap, that's enough, we need to realize that that's only one part of the puzzle.
What do you think is like, besides obviously building the product without seeing that there's a market there, what's you think the biggest mistake you've seen indies do before putting their product out?
Probably the biggest is not thinking about distribution and attention. It's, at a very fundamental level, and this kind of piggybacks on our conversation earlier about ideation, about ideas, and like what apps to build and market research and everything else like that, is that you need to have some understanding of how your app is going to be seen. So if you're building a Wikipedia app, like how are people going to find out about this? And think at that like fundamental level before you even start coding your Wikipedia app. And if your answer is, well, Apple's going to feature me, well, yeah, you're going to get thousands or tens of thousands of downloads, and then it's just going to drop to nothing. And then, okay, well, App Store search. Well, App Store search is really hard to get traction in. And maybe, but that is potentially a strategy. Like if there are some niche keywords that have reasonably good traction that you can go after and actually, get high in search results, that's one way to get attention, but it's really hard. Is there going to be social sharing? Like a Widgetsmith, people were posting screenshots and then people were asking, well, how'd you do that? Well, Widgetsmith. So there was like some natural virality, but it's like you can try and you can think that's going to happen. Like in my Perfect Weather app, it was actually called Perfect Weather. In 2013, I think is when we first launched. We added GIF sharing. I thought this was going to be amazing that people would share GIFs of the radar animation loop. And maybe in the whole history of that feature, like 100 people shared it.
You needed to make it into a meme. You should have made it into a meme on the Weather Radar app.
So you want to invest in these and experiment with these kind of features, but don't count on any one thing like that being this like golden ticket. I hear a lot of developers talk about referrals. Well, if I can build this referral system, one user can invite 10 and then they get a free month. And then like, this is going to be like this magic marketing thing for me. But what you realize when you really do the math is that, in order for one person to send the referral, first you have to like get their attention inside the app. So maybe 10% of your users are even going to see it and then take action. I mean, that'd be on the high end. So realistically, you're talking 1 or 2%. Then 1 or 2% actually share the referral. Then if they share it to 10, 15 people, maybe if you're lucky, 5% actually take action on that. And so basically, you need to have tens of thousands of people in the app before a referral program will even get you hundreds of downloads, much less tens of thousands of downloads. It's really hard. So you look at, Uber, was super successful. Well, they were giving away money and they're just a totally different app.
Right.
And like, you can't, Apple even prevents, there's certain rules, and I'm still a little confused about what exactly they're going to allow and what they're not. But they've rejected some apps for giving a discount to referrals. So like, you can't give somebody who's coming into the app a better deal than is normally available in the app. There's some kind of stuff like that App Review is picky about that I still don't understand. But anyways, point being, like, referrals are not this magic unlock. They can give you like incrementally a huge lift once you start getting to scale. But just think like, okay, press, like, this is something I've leaned on a lot. So press is great. You're going to get a boost if you can get into the press. One, it's really hard to do. Two, it's like getting featured. It's like you're going to get some downloads and then it's just going to die off. So what is going to get you attention over the long run? And just building a better product is not enough. And so this is where, that example I gave earlier of the cooking app, it's that, there was like already kind of a community forming around this where people were talking and sharing about it organically because it's something people really cared about. And so if you can find those kind of ways to get attention, if you can find a niche where you can get keywords, if you can find some kind of sustainable marketing channel. Another great one from the SubClub blog or podcast was we did this episode with Alex Ross from the Greg Plant Care app. And really early on, they were trying to figure out like how do we reach our like target market and our best possible customers. And it's super obvious in hindsight, but you got to sit down and do the exercise. They figured out that somebody buying a plant is the perfect like moment to introduce a plant care app. It's like they're spending money and they want to have success with this plant. Otherwise, they wouldn't have spent $30, $50, $100 on this plant. And so they created these little postcards with a QR code and a little like marketing pitch, and distributed them to nurseries and did partnerships. And what was amazing about that is that the nurseries benefited, because if somebody has a better experience with the plant, they're not going to return it. They're going to go buy more plants. And so it was a really easy pitch to these nurseries, like, hey, include this card, and your customers are going to have better success with their plant. And it was just a very good win-win. And he shared on the podcast, that's how they got like their first like 40, 50,000 downloads. They didn't do a ton of paid marketing. So if you can, as an indie, think beyond, Facebook ads and app store search and some of these other things, and just find creative ways to get attention for your app, because you're not just going to launch it. And I mean, yes, sometimes like Widgetsmith, it went viral, but you can't depend on that kind of stuff. So if you're going to spend months investing in this, like have some kind of a plan, like how are people going to find out about it, and be realistic about it. Don't, and that's something I think I continually fall for myself, is there's this sense of, well, people are going to get really excited about it, and that's how it's going to like get market. That doesn't work. So, and then, the paid advertising is really hard to get dialed in. Like you have to have your product really well dialed in to go spend $1 on Facebook and have any hopes of getting that dollar back, much less making $2, $3 on that. So I think it's more important for indies to really think through that attention piece. How are people going to find this app? And and you need a certain amount of that to even find product market fit, right? Like you're building this app that you don't know if people really care about and care enough about to pay for. And so having ways to get those first users in and refine the product and listen to the feedback and keep building. But then having some idea in mind of how I'm going to sustain some level of attention for this app.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to what you were saying about when you see an app being successful, there could be some missing signals about how they're spending their money or how they're marketing their app, where you as a developer are looking at it and going, oh, how do they use that? How do they create that animation in SwiftUI? It's like, that's besides the point. David, was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we close out?
Not off the top of my head. If you don't have any other questions.
No, I'm good. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it was a great chat.
Where can people find you online?
Well, I rant a lot and retweet a lot of really random stuff on Twitter. People seem to enjoy it enough to keep following me. So Dr. Barnard on Twitter. I do, as I mentioned, host the SubClub podcast. We're very focused on subscription apps, but talking to like top apps in the industry. And I already gave like, 3 or 4 examples in this conversation. I think there's a lot that indies can learn from some of these bigger apps who have bigger teams, experimenting on product market fit. But then there are some lessons that you can take away from some of that, even if you're kind of working at a smaller scale without as big of a team. So the SubClub podcast, I think, is really a fantastic resource. And I try and really vary the guests and get like a lot of different kind of like it'd be easy to just talk to a bunch of founders, but like I'm trying to get like, marketing people who are focused on like marketing apps, and trying to get different people from different industries, related kind of fields on the podcast. And then I do blog occasionally at RevenueCat, trying to pick that up this year. And I do typically kind of talk more, like there's a few good blog posts on there you can look back on, like how to sell an app is a really interesting one. So if you're thinking like, I want to build this app and maybe,
we referenced that one in the last episode with Jordan. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I talked to Jordan. He actually reached out to me personally when he was trying to sell his app. And yeah, had some great chats. I think that maybe even been why I wrote that post. I was like, well, I should just,
you're the inspiration.
He was asking me all these questions. I was like, well, I should just write it down. And then some others like, subscribers are your true fans. That was one I wrote a few years ago. Like I kind of write more like kind of thought pieces around, how to think about the industry and stuff like that. And so hoping to blog a little bit more. So check out the RevenueCat blog. But yeah, that's about it.
Thank you so much for coming on, David. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a fun chat.
People can find me on Twitter at LeoGDion. My company is Bright Digit. Please take some time to share or subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Post a review on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening to. This has been an awesome series. It's been great to end it here with David on indie development. I'm hoping to get another episode out. Our next one might be about the supposed March event. So we'll be talking about that. Stay tuned. Thank you again, and I will talk to you later. Bye.